if we are going to make a bridge between indigenous wisdom and our psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, that the foundation has to be curiosity and respect. So I feel really lucky, and it's a great privilege to have you here speaking to us tonight at Stanford. So thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jenny. Well, it's interesting because many, many years ago, about over 30 years ago, there was a conference in Stanford on psychedelics. And me and my good friends, Gary Bravo and Ralph Metzner, we went there, and there was a lot of wonderful people. I believe Jim Fadiman might have been also part of this speakers. I was, of course, a young woman just listening with bright eye, wide eye to this amazing group of speakers. And but I remember going to Stanford for that very event, and I haven't been back since. So it's just interesting, like 30 or something years later, here I am speaking to you, with you. So it's an interesting full circle here. I came across psychedelic in a kind of a coincidence when I moved to this country shortly after I came here in 1981. I met some people who were working with different substances in the context of psychotherapy. And at the time, MDMA was still legal. And so there were sessions conducted by therapists and other medicines as well, in a kind of unaware of me, underground, illegal fashion. But, I was so new, I was totally clueless as far as the legality. But it really got me very curious as far as the potential of these substances to really help healing, to help deal with trauma, to help an expansion of consciousness and a place of greater awareness of the spirit and a sense of belonging. So I did a lot of personal work way back when in the mid and to late 80s. And this was really significant for me as far as essentially reshaping the way I would see my life, the world, relationships, the human family at large, my culture, the roots from which I come from, the trauma of my culture as well. My parents have been, very traumatized from Second World War in France. And so I realized how much transformation and healing occurred in my life through those medicines. So I decided to study psychology and various approaches of body-centered psychotherapy, mindfulness, touch, all kinds of different trainings in order to give me a sense of education so I could hopefully one day do the right approach with people that would be a holistic approach. And I realized through various opportunities to meet people like the Native American women I talk about in the book, Marilyn Youngbird, with whom I did many Lakota-led sweat lodges, how expanded states of consciousness didn't really exclusively have to do with psychedelics, but had to do with the willingness to go beyond the ego structure and beyond what we consider our identity and go broader into a vaster territory of the self, and that being accessible through various techniques and not just psychedelics. So that was interesting for me to start tracking that there was a whole process around expanding consciousness that could be adapted both with psychedelic, but also without psychedelic, with different methods. So then I happened to go to Mexico and meet this woman who became my teacher for over 20 years and now continue to work with her family, her daughter, especially her daughter Eugenia. And Julieta Casimiro Estrada was my teacher, and she sort of took me under her wing. I don't know quite how to, excuse me, quite how to call it, but she found that I was receptive and I guess humble enough in her view to receive her support and to receive her instructions as well. And for her to, I don't know, she kind of adopted me. I don't know quite how to put that. I mean, I kind of adopted her too. I mean, it was a mutual affection and a great bond through our families, further than just her and I, of course. And so over the years, I got to really be immersed in what is an indigenous tradition and what is an indigenous tradition carrying sacred medicine. So it just happened that this area of Mexico in the southern part of the country has been carrying this tradition for thousands of years in an unbroken fashion. And you know, the Spaniards arrived, 1500s or so, and certainly overlaid a lot of their Catholic belief, and a lot of oppression took place, and I'm sure a lot of the priests got killed, and a lot of, you know, you know, Christianity has been sort of woven in an oppressive way into the culture, I believe, of course. But I also believe that the Mazatec have been able to maintain and preserve their tradition because they are living in such isolated place on top of the mountain, which was very hard to get to. I'm sure the Spaniards did get there eventually, but I don't think it was really as eradicated as it was in the peninsula of the Yucatan, where it was flatter and it was easier to get to, and a lot of the Mayan tradition got really eradicated pretty early upon arrival of the Spaniards. Whereas in that mountainous region, that was pretty difficult to get to. So the tradition stayed alive, and sort of adopted or incorporated the Catholic principle of, you know, prayer, or prayer existed before the Catholic got there, but a certain form of prayer, a certain relationship with, you know, the Virgin Mary and with the Guadalupe and with Christ and Jesus, and, you know, which become really symbolic and transcend the religious context at the end. But it was very interesting for me to arrive in that place where these people who had their own language and their own practice of the mushroom were able to continue that lineage and that practice and share that with me. So I was really very grateful, very fortunate. And I was not the first one there. I mean, there was plenty of other people before me who had been studying or being adopted like that by other families. I don't mean to be like the first white person going there, being in that kind of circumstance, but I was lucky enough to really stick around for many years and really bring a lot of people there. Bring Julieta and then a daughter here in California, and we did some lectures at the California Institute of Integral Study. We did some interviews, we did some travel together. There's a lot of public speaking that happened in different locations. So we were able to really bring that message, their voice, into various places. But it became sort of my, I don't know, my role to start teaching or to start passing on this way of handling these mushrooms, you know, as the Mazatec think of it, but also as I think of it. So it became sort of a bridge, sort of a weaving of different worlds over time that became really the heart of my narrative, so to speak, right? So I just say that because I came with my Western education, my personal experience with my healing work with the psychedelics that I've used. And then, of course, the bringing of this indigenous tradition, which is so ancient and so respectful and very quite different from what I had known. I mean, the thread was very similar. There was a lot of respect around ceremony and healing work, and it was never taken in a recreational or party manner. But the angle and the manner in which the medicine was handled was quite different. And the whole come from of indigenous wisdom, of course, became central to what I started to understand about this work with medicine, especially the mushroom, of course. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what I mean by indigenous wisdom, because that's part of the topic of my book and part of the topic of this talk. And it's important to define that terminology before we go further into, into talking about what this bridging may look like or what I imagine the fruitfulness of that being. So indigenous wisdom is a wisdom that is essentially based in wisdom of the earth. So when we call it indigenous, it's First Nation. It's people who live close to the earth, who are generally farmer or, in the case of First Nation in Northern America, possibly nomads, not sedentary, but moving from place to place. In the Mazatec tradition, people live in the same place. They don't move very much. The same families live for generations in the same village or in the same hamlet or the same ranch. There's a very sparse population and people don't move very far from the mountain. So the same mountain is holding what they call a spirit, a soul. They consider the mountain a being. And the indigenous tradition is very much anchored in what we call animistic belief, which is the first religious context of spirituality on the planet. So it's a lot about praying to the sacred in all that exists. So the indigenous wisdom of the Mazatec, and I'm going to limit myself to that indigenous wisdom. I don't want to be generalizing and not disrespect other traditions who may, think of things differently a little bit. So I'm just going to stay with the Mazatec for tonight. But the Mazatec feel that the water has a spirit, and the moon has a spirit, and the land has a spirit, and that mountain has a spirit, and that mountain has a spirit, and they talk to each other, and the medicine has a spirit. They have different medicines, different psychedelic medicine there, not just the mushroom. And so they have an entire relationship with the world of fungi, of course, but also plants and many different spiritual entities and energies that they have even a word for it. They call them the chicones, the spirits. And they have a Mazatec word for spirits. It's very specific. And the chicones, the spirits of the different location and the spirit of the different plants and fungi, are preyed on. So they pray to those spirits and they ask permission to the spirits. So a lot of the indigenous wisdom is about relationship. It's about, and it's true in Northern American tradition. I mean, as I'm saying that, I'm tracking my Lakota teacher, saying all my relations, Omitaku Yasin, this is what she says when she says all my relation. So the Mazatec are very much around all my relation. It just doesn't say quite like that, but it's about relationship. It's about weaving support and coexistence with other aspects of what surrounds us that are possibly invisible or not perceived from a human perspective in the same way we perceive each other or a piece of mushroom or a piece of grass or a piece of leaf or something. So it's very important to understand that relational field is very important in indigenous wisdom. And what's also important is the notion of mutual respect. So in the Mazatec tradition, respecting someone or something is the way to create relationship. To create a relationship, you have to enter with respect, with offerings, with expressing gratitude for the presence of the other before you're going to receive something. And I parallel that to going into someone's house for dinner and arriving with a bunch of flowers or a box of chocolate or something, right? So the indigenous wisdom really is leaning on this exchange of energy, this paying gratitude before we ought to receive a teaching or before we are welcome into the space of spirit and the sacred of that tradition. So it's very important to consider that, and I'll I want to bookmark this, because later on when we talk about extractive position or reciprocity or appropriation, that's going to come, that reference is going to come handy, so to speak, or valuable. So the indigenous wisdom is that, is relationship, is connecting with the earth, is listening. It's about opening a certain territory of understanding that is not cognitive, that is not analytical, that is about feeling in the entire heart, soul, and body and energy what is being offered. So indigenous people are far from stupid. In fact, they're very, very smart. And their smartness is not measured by how many books they read or how analytical they are or how they can create a theory and defend it. It's more how they get things and understand the dynamic between cause and effect. They're more physicists than mathematicians, for sure, or scientists. But they're very astute in understanding the power dynamic and the exchange of energy. And that's part of indigenous wisdom, indigenous style of being in a relationship. Now, indigenous wisdom that includes the indigenous healing used in this case, the sacred mushroom, means that we are being healed by a wisdom that is being carried by the mushroom. So the mushroom is a messenger of a greater field of wisdom that is essentially both the earth, because it grows in the earth, it carries wisdom from the planet. It's an organism that is alive, that is, mycelially broad and very connecting things together. And this mushroom is actually messaging the knowledge of the underworld to the upper world. So it fruits and carries the message from the mycelial intelligence and the earth, the womb of the earth, up to the revealed world of the visible. And then it needs light, and it needs rain, and it needs other factors that come from the sky, which is considered the, more like the masculine archetype, the masculine aspect of the divine. So the mushroom is actually a organism that marries the feminine and the masculine, that marries the unseen with the seen, that marries the flesh and the connectedness to the ethereal and the invisible. So that's a very important message that the indigenous people believe, because it's a lot more global that we'll talk about soon, which is, the medical use of psychedelics, which is about treatment of a symptom and a medication on a symptom, right? So the Mazatec believe that if we are creating a balance between our inner world and our outer world, well, these are my words, but creating a balance between what we see and what we don't see, an inquiry into what we don't see, to bring it to the light, which is very Jungian therapy when you go into the field of psychology. If you consider the psychedelic healing of the mushroom being a emergence of truth, of wisdom of the earth to be spoken to the world through words, through actions, through thoughts, through prayers, through songs or rituals, then the indigenous wisdom is being manifested, right? The wisdom is it's not existing in and of itself. It's existing because it's a practice. It's not just a flat, word. It's an inhabited word. It's an action word. It's a word based on a relational intimacy with with the earth and the messengers from the earth. So, so when the Mazatec use the mushrooms for their rituals, what they intend is to bring themselves onto the altar and pray for their healing. So they consider, which is not totally false, that we all are carrying some version of neurosis, some version of illness, some version of contraction, some version of bad thoughts, some version of anger, of sadness, of unresolved issues. We all carry something, right? If it's not from our life, it's from our parents' life, or our lineage life, or our cultural life, or our human family life. You know, we've been having a hard time for thousands of years, fighting and wars and killing. You know, it hasn't been a very pretty picture. So we have a lot of suffering, in other words, right? And human life is a lot of suffering. And so we bring ourselves on the altar of the mushroom for healing. Now, the healing can happen in many different ways. The healing is a healing of the body, of the heart, of the soul, of the spirit, of the relationship. It's a healing of, do we belong to this earth? How do we relate to this earth? How is the mushroom reminding us how we are part of this earth? So the healing is really broadcasted into these different levels of our human existence. And that's a very important factor because in a lot of other method of healing, or what we call medical use of psychedelics, you know, we're not looking at the diversity of territories in which the psychedelic lands. We're looking into treating a very specific afflictions or ailments or symptom or dysfunction. Whereas the Mazatec have a very holistic approach, and that's something that was really clear to me in my own healing when I first started this work as a participant, but also in interfacing with the Mazatec. It was very clear to me that, you know, the way of healing is broad, it touches many different sectors of the human life. The Mazatec believe that in order to heal, we need to be spiritually well. It's a very far cry from the medical field of the Western world, where we believe that to be well, we have to have a healthy body. Well, we're starting to feel like if we have a peaceful heart, that will help. But a lot of the time is, you know, how are we doing in our vehicle of the human body? And that's how we measure health. The Mazatec don't measure health that way. I mean, sure, they measure health and they keep themselves very healthy and they eat healthy and, you know, more or less, right? But the health in the Mazatec world is measured by the peace in your spirit, the peace in your relationship with the divine. Are you connected with the divine? Are you in good standing with your dialogue with God, or how you think of God, or the Chicones, the spirits of the land? Are you in relationship with the Virgin Mary or the Guadalupe? Are you in a dialogue? Are you in an exchange that your spirit feels fueled and you have a place to go pray when you need support? So for them, healing has to do with reestablishing a contact, a line of communication, a place of rest, a sense of belonging with this world of spirit. You know, a lot of people who take psychedelics, and not just mushroom, by the way, talk about psychedelic like, I belong to a bigger place than this life here, that this body here, than this society here, that this human life here. There's a much bigger picture, right? We know it from Johns Hopkins study, from NYU, from everybody's offering this wonderful psychedelic treatment. People come back with reports of the great picture, right? The great sense of the bigger sense of what exists beyond this. And that's exactly what the Mazatec are talking about. They're really talking about that. They talk about, who are you in relation to your spirit, right? How do you locate yourself? Because if you locate yourself in the belonging of the big picture, belonging of an eternal world of unity and love, then you are well. Then everything here is okay. I mean, you might not always be happy, you might be going through suffering, but above all, you're in the hands of the divine. And you know that, and you've been there, and that's your stability. That's the place in which you land through your suffering, right? So you can sustain your suffering of a human being. So for them, healing is repairing, reconnecting, cultivating, nourishing this relationship with the divine. That being said, they are not really bypassing the emotional process of the human being existence. And, you know, they look at themselves and they realize what has hurt them, and they find the compassion, the forgiveness, and they find the sadness when they have grief. They cry. I mean, they're not just spiritually bypassing. They are very, very much in their heart. They're not very shy about their emotions, and they're very embodied in the emotion. They are, you know, not bashful at all about what they feel, which can be, you know, interesting when they get angry, but they're not very bashful. They think that what they feel is totally okay. They don't have a sense of editing or you know, feeling that they have to be spiritual or something, and this is where it's at for them. They're pretty authentic emotionally. So that's the indigenous wisdom, more or less. So there's a lot more to say about that. We could spend a lot more time, and I'm sure I could come up with a lot more narrative about that. But let's talk a little bit about the medical use of psychedelics. So, okay, so what I call the medical use of psychedelic in the Mazatec traditions, you know, is the restoring the spirit, right? That's their version of medical use. Working with addiction, you know, what leads you to drink, what the disturbance in you, how come you are so disconnected from the divine, that you feel so scared, you know, that you feel so agitated. So, you know, all this is also being part of their medical treatment, I should say. But what we do here, we have applications of psilocybin in this case, which are very successful, which are very promising, which are finally re-emerging in the field of medical and medical treatment and science. And I'm really glad, because, you know, it's time that we lean on a science that has been existing for thousands of years for our treatment of the people who suffer in our modern industrialized world. So I'm really glad this is returning to being accepted and understood and comprehended in a good way, and that there is studies and safety and you know, caution being used in the way of bringing the psychedelics back into what can be helpful for millions of people. You know, I was talking to this woman that I respect a lot, Mary Cosimano. Mary Cosimano is one of the main psychologists who is doing the journeys of Johns Hopkins University with Roland Griffith. And she has been, I don't know if it's still going on, but she was definitely sitting for hundreds of people in the depression study there. And she was saying that, you know, people do get better. I mean, people do get better because they connect to a larger place, because they feel a sense of care and a sense of being loved by a greater embrace. That is, might be a spiritual embrace, or it might be the planet embrace, and it's also the embrace of the guide. And I want to stop here for a moment, because what makes me what's make me happy about what has been done so far is that there has been a guide. You know, in the Mazatec tradition, you have a curandera, or a guide, or healer, or however we call them. Not called shamans, but they're called healers. So the healer guides the ceremony, right? She holds the space, she prays, she sings, she works on whoever needs to be worked on. She works on the body. She intuitively feels where people are going, and if they feel distressed, if they feel well, if they feel hesitant, if they feel scared, and she knows what to do. She knows how to intervene, both with her energy work, which is very invisible but not so subtle, by the way, or with her hands-on work. She can come also and work on people because she believes the body is the vehicle, and if the body has some contraction, we're going to work on the body because that's what it is. There's not a lot of shyness about touching someone's, head or hands or belly or whatever. And in the medical use of psychedelic that Mary is part of, she's there. She holds the hand of someone. She might not do all the indigenous technology of intervention that the Mazatec are using because she's not educated or is not part of what's allowed in Johns Hopkins. But what I want to point out here is that she's there, that there's someone carrying while the person is having the journey. And what has worried me a lot in the development of the medical use or the direction of the medical use of psychedelic is the possibility of not having guides, of not having someone, of the dispensation of psilocybin, or, we know with ketamine, that, it's a do-it-yourself kind of moment. You're there, even though you might be in a high level of expansion and maybe needing some support, and that you're not getting the support. So the place, the context of such experience that originally from a wisdom place and from a wise place. Wisdom means wise, from a wise place, meaning it works better and it's more fruitful and it's safer and it's more the way it's supposed to be handled, tried and true for thousands of years, right? So leaning on that wisdom would mean that everyone in the medical field would adopt the idea that a psychedelic should be always given or dispensed by a guide, with the support of someone who knows the tradition, who knows the medicine, who knows the interventions, who knows the support that needs to be happening before, during, and after the experience. And so, what worries me is that the slow pruning of an old tradition that has so many complex aspects, not all of them possibly being adaptable in our treatment center in California, say, or anywhere in the developed, modernized world. That all these different essential aspect of what constitute the use of psychedelic would be sort of pruned, diluted, eradicated, slowly falling apart, and that would be left is the person alone with their psychedelic substance, either in a low dose so they don't feel too much, or risking a high dose that could be challenging and possibly damaging, actually. And then, not a lot of human support afterwards. I've heard about this company who wants to develop an app to do the integration, so people would actually go on their phone and have a sense of how they need to do after their journey. It's a very, it prunes the essential part, which is the indigenous wisdom about relationship, about human relationship with the natural world, relationship with spirits. When you are alone with your phone and a nap after an experience, it's going to be really isolated. It's not supposed to be that way. And that's my concern. My concern is that, we are human beings. We're trying to reconstruct society in a better way, or heal the society and create more sustainability and, a sense of spirit, a sense of, how we're going to make it through the 21st century. And if we take out the human element, it's going to be really hard. It's the industrialization from where we come from is not an example we should follow for the future. And, we have done that. It has led to a catastrophe. It has led to modernization, and we're grateful over something. But we also know that the absence of relationship with the natural world and amongst human beings is a catastrophe. The mental health crisis in the world, in developed countries, is catastrophic because of the industrialization and the isolation of human beings amongst each other. So if we we have to be cautious that in the psychedelic field, if we use psychedelics, we have to lean on what psychedelic means in the indigenous cultures and learn from that. We can take the earth element and we can take the relationship element. So, there's other things that maybe can be adapted. We can certainly bridge different things. But if we remove these two essential elements of indigenous wisdom, we're gonna slip into another industrialization around psychedelics that would be extractive, that would be abusive, that would be appropriating for sure, meaning taking something and reducing it to very little and synthesizing it and really reducing it, separating it from its original impact and source. So obviously you can hear I'm very motivated about that because I think that's really important. That's the message Indigenous people have left with us, is the care, the care of their teachings. So I don't feel like I have to carry the Mazatec tradition on my shoulders, by no means, but I feel like, wow, how do I speak about that and convey that what's really important is the respect of a tradition, the respect of the essential elements of that tradition, the earth and the relationships with the guide, with the medicine, with the divine. We have to do that. I remember a man doing a journey with me in Mexico, and he was a investor. We'll put it that way. He was an investor, and he said at the end of the journey, he said, "We can't take the sacred out of this." Right? And I said, "Yeah, well, you do that," because he was one of the investors in a big company who was going to exactly do that, take the sacred out of it, and make a product that would be making some people very rich and possibly help some people with depression. But the dispensing and the caring and the aftercare was, I don't know how much that was part of the equation of this system. So my work has been about attempting. I'm really just attempting to bridge or to communicate, at least speak of, and possibly the best I can embody those principles that I just talked about in a model of Western psychotherapy, in a model of psychological care that takes in the weight of trauma, the weight of addictions, and the depressions, and the anxiety, and the isolation, and the suicides, and the grief, and all these different things that we as psychologists deal with, that we counsel, that we hold space for, and to bring psychedelics in this environment in a way that can, just like I received, can provide a powerful, holistic, potent healing modality that is respectful of where it's coming from, bringing in the philosophy of this respectful use, the gratitude towards the teachers and the place and the land and the people who have carried this tradition. Supporting people during those experiences in ways that is psychologically educated in terms of consent, of touch, relationship from a therapeutic perspective, sort of sense of ethics, a sense of respect, and then also bring in the technology and the manner in which the Indigenous people work. So when I go, I don't go now with COVID, but when I've taken a lot of my students whom I train in this way of psychedelic training, and some clients or some people that wish to be receiving this treatment or this approach, and this treatment, because some of them come because they're in the process of dying, or the process of grieving, or the process of dealing with depression. it's very interesting to see what I can offer to them as a preparation phase, as an integration phase outside of Mexico, meaning, here in California or in the world. And then in Mexico, work there with the medicine, with my teachers, and provide the environment on the land in which it was meant to be offered originally. And yet offer a sort of I call it a hybrid, respectfully, meaning a way of holding the space that is informed by my background, which is not Mazatec, with my teacher, with the Mazatec person, who then brings this other layer. And sometimes I can do work by myself too there, and so then it's just me carrying on the tradition, or being allowed to dispense this work. So, the book I wrote was really an attempt to describe the way this method of holistic approach, based in a traditional framework, and then expressed through the way we can address our psychology and the way we can actually address psychological situations or alienations or afflictions, and so this has been the attempt, through the description of the holistic model, and through the description of the preparation, the integration, which is the three pillars of my what I can offer as a non-Indigenous person, understanding also what can be done and how I work with the medicine myself, of course, but really framing the experience in this level of narrative and what I call a more maybe systematic and explained intelligence, right? That is kind of a systematically, categorized, and like that. There is a bit of a roadmap and a reference point to how to best hold those healing places. I before closing, because I think we're just about done. What I wanted to say also is we're looking at this traditional use of medicine, sacred mushroom, for treatment, right? For healing, and we're looking at that as in the medical use of psychedelics. But let's remember the Mazatec central piece, which is, I think, very important for us Westerners, is that we are looking for consciousness. We're not just looking for a healing of an affliction. A healing of an affliction is a small way to address the bigger picture of who we are. And so when we talk about consciousness, we talk about a spiritual state. We talk about, again, going back to the beginning, we talk about a belonging, a sense of oneness, a sense of unseparatedness, which is what the Mazatecs really believe the mushrooms are for making us blend our sense of self with a bigger space of the spirit. And when we lose ourselves, we call it ego dissolution. It's a nice word that has been used. When we dissolve our ego, we are really ending our identity, our identification with our identity, and we're becoming merged with the bigger embrace of the divine, as the Mazatec would say, or the big field of consciousness, as the Eastern philosophers would say, or the pure consciousness, right? And that is really the healing that, as a human race, we're really looking for. Because the main trauma that we have is individuality. Individuation is healthy and helpful, but this over-individualization and this isolation that is occurring in the modern world more and more is what really consciousness on the broader spectrum can heal and can invite us to feel like we belong to a larger picture. That is part of our life and beyond this life, that is existed before our life, through this life, and after this life. So it's more like the plugging back into the continuum of the source where we're coming from. So I believe this is what psychedelics can offer. I'm glad to see psychedelic weaving into the medical field. I am part of FDA-approved studies in Santa Monica with a group of physicians who have invited me specifically so I can bring my angle into this field of FDA-approved studies. And we're doing a study on COVID-related grief, which is very dear to my heart because I know some people who have died of COVID, and I want to help the families of those of those people who have passed away. So it's a very interesting. I mean, beside the fact that it's a very touching study, of course, that will be addressing what we are going through as a global family here with the COVID. It will be also interesting to see how someone of my angle, rooted in some indigenous practices, and bridging that to the psychology of the Western world can bring into such study and hopefully start this integration of more earth wisdom into the studies on the medical level. So thank you very much.
Well, you can't hear anybody, but if they were here, they'd be clapping really loudly.
Thank you.
In your book, I don't know if it was something that you said or Julieta said to you, but that you are a translator. And I have to say that was the most lucid translation of a whole lot of things I think I didn't understand nearly as well. And it was just so clear, such clear terms.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really, really enjoyed that myself. I'm sure.
Thank you.
Everyone did.
Thank you.
One thing you said toward the end is, we have this idea of, ego dissolution, and this theme threaded through everything you're talking about of connection and separation. And it was making me think, to dissolve is not to disappear. So, when a cube of sugar dissolves into water, it doesn't disappear. It dissolves into. And so in the Mazatec tradition, what you're talking about, the spirit world, the world of soul is the solvent.
That's right.
And then the mushroom is the conduit through which the person or the person can dissolve into.
That's right. It's really letting go into the blending with the divine. Yeah, being the sugar in the water. That's a beautiful image. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think also just continuing on that theme, I think the way that you are talking about the Mazatec tradition in terms of this, the basic process of connection and relation and this matrix of relationships, I think it's not a coincidence that so many of our depictions of dystopia have this element of isolation, people in their pods, stuck, separated, and I think it's probably not a coincidence that the pervasive disconnection in our society leads us to seek psychedelic therapy, leads us to the things that will reconnect or have the potential to help reconnect. So
I agree. I totally agree with you. I think we've created an illness and we found the cure.
Right. Yeah. Right. So there's a whole lot of questions that are coming in, and I'll try to gracefully weave them into my own curiosity because I can't. Unfortunately, I only have one brain and I can't do all at once. But I think a question I have and a lot of people have is, for a person who is raised in the West and doesn't have a personal relationship with tradition, with indigenous tradition, for instance, how can we respectfully engage these traditions without a personal connection, or maybe do we need one?
First, my first answer, or what comes to my mind immediately, is we are all connected to the planet. So we're all children of this planet. So we're all siblings, right? We're not very separated from any indigenous tradition, really. And if we spend some time connecting with the land, with nature, I know it's not always easy for some of us, but if we find a way to connect with nature and the world, the live world, we listen back to our own ancestry, our own indigenous ancestry, and we are being told how to pray, how to touch the land, how to make offerings. Now, this is exactly why I wrote this book, because I thought, I want to talk to people about offerings. I want to talk to people about, connecting with the land. I want to kind of share about that. The Mazatec people are very happy that anybody would do offerings. They don't feel like offerings belongs to them. In every indigenous tradition, you have offerings. Every First Nation people does offering. We just forgot. We forgot. We just have to remember. We just have to practice the practice until the practice speaks to us. So when my teacher was at my house and she was asking me where I did my offerings, and I said, well, here and there, and she said, well, where's your place of offering? And so it reminded me of going to India with her, in fact, and there was a place for offerings. People would do this little, Tibetan flags, and there was a place for offering. Or you go to a Native American tradition, and you have a place for offering, right? You hang your prayer ties in the sweat lodge. You have a place for offering, and I think that all traditions have a place for offering. And if we listen to the communality of how Indigenous people practice their spirituality, practice their relationship with the land and with each other and with spirit, and how they pray, we can create our own prayers. We can borrow them. The point is, if we borrow a Native American prayer or a Mazatec prayer, I don't want to talk for the Lakota, but I've talked to my Lakota teacher and I've asked her permission, is that okay if I do prayer ties with some people in my woods, if I want to do a ritual? And she said, of course. She was looking at me like I was crazy. She said, well, of course. And she said, remember now, the purple is for the center and the white is for this. And she was reminding me of the colors and the directions. So I would be communicating that appropriately to the people. She was thrilled that people would do prayer ties. She said, oh yeah, do prayer ties as much as you can. The world needs prayer ties. She was like thrilled. So I think that it's a matter of asking, if we don't know anybody, we do the best we can, knowing that we do this out of heart and respect, and we try to reconnect with our own manner of praying and offering and receiving and cleansing ourselves with water or sage or incense or sound. And this is a human experience that is rooted in every one of us. And if we go back far enough, we all have it. We all own it. It's not owned by certain people. They have their own. I agree, and we want to be respectful, right? But we can create our own. And sometimes, getting inspired by a beautiful ceremony that you've been at, when someone, threw corn to the east and it touched you and you felt a sense of, yes, I want to do that. I don't think people would feel disrespected because you would do your own ritual coming from your heart in relation to your land, into the land that belongs to everyone. This is one planet belonging to everyone, and we can all pray to the earth the way we want to pray to the earth. And when I talk to the Indigenous people I've spoken with in my life and asked, how do you feel about us taking some of your ritual and doing them? They said, it's fine. You're not taking our soul away because you're doing our ritual. You're just learning. You're just children learning from the parents, and we're happy that you're learning. Learn, children, learn. Remember, if we're here to hold the wisdom that has been forgotten in your culture, we're happy. So I think that the idea that and I'm not speaking for other people. I'm not speaking for, peyote people or Lakota people or First Nation people. I'm not speaking for people from Africa or South America or Asia. But I know from the Mazatec and from my Lakota teacher and from my friends in Bolivia that they are all very happy that we're doing things that they can pass on to us. They're glad. They're glad to. They're not possessive really, and they feel we're not taking anything away from them by learning. right? I mean, if I teach you something, it doesn't take anything away from me. You can go and talk about what I've talked about. It doesn't take that word away from me. You pass it on. You teach other people. You share it with other people. And that's great. That's more wisdom shared in the world. Or that's more, um, so that's my answer to that.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I feel like I was almost getting emotional listening to you say that. You know, what I'm hearing you say is I think there's a human inheritance that, relationship with land, relationship with spirit, that is human, that in a way cannot be claimed by any particular group or culture, but that there are things to be learned and ways of relating based on respect,
That's right.
curiosity,
That's right.
and and so I think that makes great sense on a personal level. And I think you would probably agree that it's a separate story of, you know, corporatization or the capitalization of a particular or the branding of a particular sense of wisdom. So really extracting, like an extractive mindset. So that is a separate thing than what I think you just talked about, which is this very personal relationship with self, spirit, world. Um, just continuing with this theme, given that we now live in a world where there are institutions that let's say have power and carry on the power and set the guidelines for psychedelic use and et cetera. Um, how on that level of institutions and organizations of power can there be reciprocity with mm, the birthplace of what they are carrying forward? The birthplace of plant medicine and the wisdom around using them.
That's a very good question. And it's interesting you said that because today I just received a connection through my website of this man named Eduardo. I responded immediately and he was sending me an article exactly on this, specifically with the Mazatec actually, which of course interests me and I'm going to be more in touch with him, which is exactly that. Like, okay, so Gordon Wasson took the mushroom, brought it to the West. Maria Sabina got persecuted in Huautla. Nobody cared. And then now, this is being a big deal and people make billions of dollars and the Mazatec are basically being exploited and it's very extractive and there's nothing going back to them. I mean, I don't think anything is going back from Compass into the Mazatec world, for example. I don't know if they have a reciprocity policy or value and what project would they support in the Mazatec region for the preservation of the language or education or health of the children or, I'm not sure that would be happening, but I can talk to them. But so I think there is that danger, and that the greed of capitalism is descending upon the use of psychedelics. The psilocybin is sort of the first to get it, but that's going to keep going, and they're going to find a way to synthesize ayahuasca, or mescaline is already done, and iboga has been made into ibogaine, and everything is being synthesized and extracted, and nothing is given back to the people from which it comes from, who have sustained this tradition through ages, keep it alive so we can extract it, or some people can extract it. So, yeah, it's a very big problem, and I'm very attached to the creation of a reciprocity fund for the Mazatec that would be actually, given to a group of Mazatec people who would then handle the fund and distribute the fund or use the fund accordingly to what they see fit. Most likely preserving the language is a big urgency. Making sure everybody has drinking water, has some food, maybe creating some systematic education or systematic, welcoming of people. And so foreigners don't just arrive there and start to extract, ceremonies from people for, $10 and going away and leaving them, hungry. So this, that's what the article was talking about, and I'm totally with this. So the idea of creating a reciprocity fund is a big I mean, it can be very tricky because a lot of companies want to look good, right? They want to look like they're doing reciprocity. Is it lip service? You know, how much would they give? And then, you know, you don't want to flood a region that lives in a certain economical, how could I say, style. I don't want to say poor, but I don't want to keep them poor. It's not my goal, but you don't want to put $10 million onto a village, you know, that could be very catastrophic also, right? So I think that what the Mazatec, in talking with my friend, oh, there is Inti Garcia Flores is a Mazatec person and is listening. Oh, hello. Hello, hello, hello. I'm supposed to talk to you, so you have to reach me. Someone told me to talk to you, so it's great. But what would be really wonderful is to bring the Mazatec voice forward into this world. I just did an interview with Eugenia Casimiro recently that has been put on my site and everything for people to listen, because I feel that was her opportunity to have her voice in Spanish, to express her voice. So I'm really interested in having the Mazatec voices brought into the conversation. I mean, I'm just like this messenger. I mean, I'm a bridge, okay. You know, I'm having a specific position. I understand, and I'm okay with that. I'm happy to do what I'm doing. I think it's valuable. I think what would be very interesting, and what Eugenia, what my friend told me, she said, I would want the mushroom to really heal people. So she's up for having a lot of people who really need it being healed. And that means making this accessible to a lot of people. And she is coming from a very poor background, and she would want her medicine to reach the poor people and to be given. So I think that there could be, a reciprocity fund, but then my friend at least, I don't want to generalize into, and loop you in, but like make this sacred medicine available to people, both in Mexico, of course, in the world, but also in this country here, for example, to people who really need it, who can't afford to pay a psychedelic therapist, or go to a clinic, or even know about the possibility, and that people would have access. I've been working in Oregon, for the campaign on this initiative. I was part of the campaign board with a few of us, and so the initiative passed in the vote, and now we are developing the way these mushrooms will become available to people. And we want to make sure it's going to be done well, with a sense of sacred, with a sense of respect, with a sense of giving back to the Mazatec, with a sense of actually, passing this access to people who really need it, and not just for the rich. So we are really. I feel like I know that Eugenia is really happy with that, because I'm trying to do what she's telling me to do, meaning make this available to people. The point is to heal. It can be in Mexico, it can be in Huautla, it can serve me, but the point is that the mushroom needs to serve people, right? So it's less about her getting stuff, but more about passing on the healing to people who really need it, even outside of the country. So we could have a reciprocity fund, surely, to be handled by the Mazatec the way they want, of course. And then we could have, with their accord, on a board or on a council, a way to make money available to offer that to people who wish to have this experience and otherwise would not be able to access it.
Yeah, I mean, really, really well said. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that part of the reciprocity, in a sense, is not only honoring the tradition from whence it came, but also, in a sense, paying it forward. It's a generativity.
Yeah.
And just to maybe to dig a little deeper into this question of reciprocity. What have been your personal experiences? For instance, you mentioned speaking with Eugenia and Julieta before that, and have you heard specific ideas from people in the Mazatec tradition about what they would feel would be a good way to honor them. If, I mean, you mentioned before, at least in your experience, they're glad that other people are learning and healing. But just curious if you, either in your personal experience or from things you heard from actual Mazatec people, what they might find to be respectful ways of honoring their tradition.
Well, Aurenia, that's a question for Inti. Maybe he has more opinion about that. Being a Mazatec person, I want to make sure that's his voice there, respectfully. Aurenia says that we're trying to survive here. Some people in the Mazatec region are really struggling with educating their children. When a child leaves Huautla, to get an education, they have to live somewhere else. And I've been certainly sponsoring people, kids to study and be able to access education myself. I mean, of course, I'm doing my reciprocity because I must, but I mean, I want to. But I think there could be, education funds for the children to have access, because unless it's hard. It's hard to even go to the nearby city of Tehuacan or Oaxaca or Mexico City, and then if you have a family, maybe you can live somewhere. So the children are struggling to get an education, and some of them wish to leave Huautla. Some of them wish to have an education and come back. I mean, I know this young dentist who went to get educated and came back to live in Huautla with his wife and established his clinic there. And so it's not to mean like, they want to flee the town. The town is very happening, actually, but there's poverty. There's a lot of poverty. So I think, from what I understand, I think the Mazatec would like to have more agency over how the medicine is being used, how it's being dispensed, how the people arriving in town are being welcomed in a good way, given, being really guided in good ways in the way of the ceremony. They don't want people to play and get high and drink or smoke pot while they do ceremony. They want respect, and so I think there's a way that they would like to, from what I understand and read and talk, they would like to have more of a almost like an information, education, how sacred that is for them. So people would almost like, have to be welcomed into the town almost and corralled into ways, in a council way. It's not like everybody's going to pull them away, but I think the language is a big urgency. I fear for the language that it may disappear. There's a lot of old traditions of more in the countryside outside of Huautla that have different traditions and different practices that are also slowly disappearing. That could be taught, could be the way of the tradition could be passed on and taught to young people who wish to learn and wish to carry that in their life as a proud Mazatec, offer that to the world, speak around, go around the world and talk about it and represent their nation and their traditions. So, I don't know, Inti may have some comments on, yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So, in the West, I guess broadly defined, we have there is this separate tradition in a way of science, or a particular tradition, which we call science, which is based on these ideas of isolating variables, asking questions with very specific methodology. And maybe there actually isn't an ideological discontinuity between the science of people in other cultures and what we're calling science here. But in any case, in our world where we're doing, in the world of the Johns Hopkins Laboratory, for instance, they are asking the question of, does psychedelic assisted psychotherapy work, or is it effective for the treatment of illness? And part of abiding by these mainstream scientific rules means isolating variables, being very controlled in how the therapy is delivered, standardization, et cetera, et cetera. And this seems to be in tension with some of the most important elements that you brought up from the Mazatec tradition and others, which is a really rich matrix of relationships connected to the earth. So I'm curious, and I think others are as well, in what practical ways are you, perhaps in your study with the COVID-related grief, and then in other studies that we're doing, how can we bring and integrate the wisdom of matrix relationships into the halls of Johns Hopkins and NYU and the Western science? How are you doing it? How can we do it?
Well, I hate to refer to my book again, but that's kind of what I was doing in the book, in a way, trying to describe and explain. So we prepare. We, for sure, we prepare and we do integration. There's a beginning and there's an end. How to prepare for an experience like this ought to be really very skillfully guided. How people, and I think that Johns Hopkins does some preparation, but I think that the preparation I would, suggest or vouch for, or in my study, for example, is to have people look at the holistic model I describe in the book. Who are you in relationship with your body? Again, relationship. Who are you in relationship to your body? Who are you in relationship to your heart and to your emotions and to your mind? Who are you in relationship to your spirit? How are you doing there? And who are you in relationship with your collective? Who are you in relationship with nature? So then people start to look at this different field of relationships. And through that holistic approach, they ground themselves in something more than just the analytical, intellectual, let's check the box of what my symptoms are, right? So they look at themselves in a more holistic way, which is, in my opinion, a manner that is feeling to me fairly true to the Indigenous way, what I've absorbed of the Indigenous way. Again, it's an interpretation. I'm not saying I was told to do that, but Julieta used to call me the translator. So I'm kind of trying to translate what I understand from this beautiful tradition into something that we Westerners can get, because the beautiful, rich field of the Mazatec cosmology is very, very complex, and I don't know if I know much of anything about it, really. So I'm just going to be very kind of modest about that, humble about that. But my translation of that through the holistic model is the way I think I can create a better holistic framework in the preparation of the experience, how to see the experience, for how does it touch these different layers of relationship, right? And then on the other hand, how at the end of it, how do we integrate? How do we make sense? How do we ground and weave this mycelial intelligence or presence into different levels of our relational field, with our body, with our mind? And so then it's like mycelium wrapping itself around us. It just doesn't wrap itself around our mind or around our ailment. It wraps itself everywhere. And so it penetrates everything. Julieta used to tell me, once the mushroom is inside you, it lives there forever. Like, it comes in there and it takes residence in you. It inhabits you, and then you're like inhabited by this mycelial intelligence. And it was a joke, but we were listening to each other's mushroom in the ear or whatever, this kind of. But so so that's the translation. The translation is bringing the different levels of relationship. So the whole body, the whole self, the whole heart, the whole field of relationship is encompassed into the healing process. Right? And then during the journey itself, many things happen. It can be seeing the big picture. It can be diving into a wounded childhood. It can be facing an addictive pattern and self-destructiveness with everything that, is challenging about that. It can be, the love for our child. It can be the regret of how we've treated some people, right? All these different emotional, spiritual history and the transcendence and the bigger picture and the land speaking to us and the mushroom teaching us how to connect the dots. All these are also maps. I mean, again, creating maps for the place of the journey, maps for the unconscious, so maps of how we bring the unconscious conscious. So I think that this narrative that I attempted to describe in the book, this preparation and this integration and the journey through the holistic framework of the whole person, is for me a good way to bring this indigenous model into our modern approach.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And again, I hear you talking about an approach, a posture, an honoring of the work, and a set of values, rather than a specific set of actual practices or a specific set of anything, but rather like an orientation toward the medicine and more basic ideas of preparation, integration, curiosity, etc.
Yeah.
Well, I promised I'd let you go, and I know you've got a drive home. Anything you any final words that you'd like to say to young or youngish people in the audience who are interested in the field?
Well, you're in a very good position, young people in the field, because the world is very promising ahead. It's also challenging ahead. I think there is a great curiosity in the science, and I'm really glad. And I'm, like I said, glad to participate in the little bit I can. And I think that the field of psychedelic is invited into a territory of consciousness, of diligence, and of respect that ought to be really taken seriously in the face of medical technology gobbling up the psychedelics and turning them into pills and medication, and not always very diligently dispensed and respected. So I encourage people to connect with traditional use, connect with rituals, connect with information that have to do with the original holder of traditions, and stand in a posture of respect, regardless if you're connected to an indigenous person or not. Stand in respect, stand in reverence for the medicine, for yourself and the space it opens. And once we get more into the sacred, right, the space of the sacred, then we can move forward as a collective and as a society with a different direction than what we have done in the last while. So, but you're positioned very well to create a culture that is deep, that is conscientious, that is respectful, and that speaks a loud voice as far as respecting psychedelic.
Well, thank you so much, Francoise. I mean, your words are ringing really true, and I think that there's a power when the words are clear and there's a resonance. So, I really appreciate you coming. I think everybody, people again are probably clapping a second time. This could, of course, be a many-hour conversation.
Yeah.
Fortunately for us, you wrote a book, Consciousness Medicine. A couple people were asking, so I think they can interact with you and everything you've learned through that book. And I hope we can have you back, maybe in person, someday soon.
That'd be great. It's just down the hill from my house.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Francoise. And
you're welcome, Jenny. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really wonderful to be back in Stanford after so many years. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care and good night. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.